In the cold of dawn, a dark car turns off its headlights on the corner of a deserted street. On the edge of the sidewalk, a thin German shepherd stands with a loose chain around its neck. Inside a nearby house, a baby sleeps in a stroller leaning against the gate. Silently, the dog approaches a fallen toy and pushes it to the rusty fence. A resident watches from the window, safe, but doesn't open the door. The car drives away without a trace, while the dog lies down in front of the gate. In the silence, the baby reaches its hand out to the animal. But what happens next? Love stories with animals. Then subscribe now and don't miss any. Thank you for following us. Now back to our story. The headlights disappeared around the corner of Maple Street, leaving nothing but the echo of a car engine fading into the pre-dawn silence of Millbrook, Ohio. What remained on the sidewalk would change this quiet neighborhood forever, though none of the sleeping residents could have imagined it at the time. A German shepherd sat motionless on the cracked pavement, his thick coat matted and dull, ribs visible beneath the fur that had once been glossy black and tan. Around his neck hung a heavy chain collar, its links catching the dim glow of the streetlight above. His dark eyes, clouded with confusion and abandonment, scanned the empty street where his owner had just driven away without looking back. The dog had no name now. The family who had raised him from a puppy had called him Rex, but that identity had been stripped away, along with everything else he had known. For 3 years, he had been their protector, their companion, sleeping at the foot of their son's bed and alerting them to every visitor. But when the family's circumstances changed and they moved to a smaller apartment that didn't allow pets, they had made the decision that would haunt this street for months to come. As the first rays of morning light crept over the rooftops of Maple Street, the German shepherd rose slowly and began to explore his new territory. The street was lined with modest 2-story homes, each with small front yards protected by chain-link fences or low hedges. American flags hung from several porches, and children's toys lay scattered in driveways, evidence of the families that called this place home. Sarah Mitchell was the first to notice him. She had stepped onto her front porch at 6:30 in the morning, coffee mug in hand, to retrieve the morning paper when she saw the large dog nosing through an overturned garbage can 3 houses down. Her breath caught in her throat. Living on Maple Street for 5 years, she knew every dog in the neighborhood, and this one definitely didn't belong. "David," she called back into the house, her voice tight with concern. "There's a strange dog outside." Her husband appeared in the doorway, still adjusting his tie for work. David Mitchell was a practical man who worked as a supervisor at the local manufacturing plant, and his first instinct was to assess potential problems. "Probably just got loose from somewhere," he said, squinting at the animal in the distance. "Owner will come looking soon enough." But Sarah wasn't convinced. There was something about the way the dog moved, slowly and deliberately, that suggested he wasn't just temporarily lost. "Look at him, David. He's too thin, and that collar it looks like a chain." Their 10-month-old daughter, Emma, babbled from her high chair inside, drawing Sarah's attention back to the morning routine. She had no idea that this moment marked the beginning of a story that would test everything she thought she knew about: fear, trust, and the bonds that connect the most unlikely companions. By 8 o'clock, word had spread to several neighbors. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, who had lived on Maple Street longer than anyone else at 73 years old, watched from behind her lace curtains as the German shepherd moved methodically from yard to yard. Her arthritis made it difficult to get around, but her mind was sharp, and she remembered stories her late husband used to tell about guard dogs used by less savory characters. "That's no family pet," she muttered to herself, reaching for her phone to call her neighbor Janet Rodriguez, who lived 2 houses down. Janet was getting her twin 8-year-old boys, Miguel and Carlos, ready for school when the phone rang. As a single mother working 2 jobs to make ends meet, she barely had time for neighborhood gossip, but Mrs. Patterson's worried tone got her attention. "There's a big dog wandering around out there, Janet. Looks like one of those attack dogs. You better keep those boys inside until someone figures out where he came from." Through her kitchen window, Janet could see the German Shepherd lying in the shade beneath the oak tree that sat between her property and the Mitchell's house. He wasn't moving aggressively or barking, just waiting. Something about his posture reminded her of the strays she used to care for as a child in Mexico, dogs that had learned to survive on their own, but still hoped for kindness from humans. "He doesn't look dangerous, Mrs. Patterson," Janet said gently. "Maybe just hungry." "Don't you be naive, dear. Dogs like that aren't abandoned for no reason. Mark my words, there's trouble behind this." As the morning progressed, more neighbors became aware of their unexpected visitor. Tom Bradley, a retired police officer who lived at the end of the street, made it his business to keep an eye on the situation. His 30 years on the force had taught him to spot potential problems before they escalated, and a large, unattended dog definitely fell into that category. "Probably dumped by some drug dealer who didn't need him anymore," he told his wife, Margaret, as they watched from their living room window. "These German Shepherds are trained to be aggressive, could turn on anyone at any moment." Margaret, a former elementary school teacher with a softer heart, wasn't so sure. "He's just lying there, Tom. Hasn't bothered anyone." "That's what they do," Tom replied grimly. "They wait, study the territory, then they strike when you least expect it." The German Shepherd, unaware of the conversations happening about him, had found a spot near a storm drain where he could observe the street while staying partially hidden. His training had taught him to be aware of his surroundings, and he could sense the eyes watching him from behind windows and doors. But he made no aggressive moves, issued no threatening growls. He simply existed in the space between belonging and isolation, waiting for something he couldn't yet understand. Around noon, Sarah Mitchell made a decision that would set everything in motion. Emma had been fussy all morning, and Sarah thought some fresh air might help. She strapped her daughter into the stroller and stepped outside, intending to walk to the small park at the end of Maple Street. But as they approached the sidewalk, she noticed the German Shepherd had moved closer to their property. Emma immediately perked up at the sight of the dog, pointing with her chubby finger and making excited sounds. "Doggy! Doggy!" she babbled, one of the few words she had mastered. Sarah's grip tightened on the stroller handle. The dog was less than 20 feet away now, and she could see the size of him clearly. He had to weigh at least 80 pounds, with powerful shoulders and alert ears that tracked every movement. But when their eyes met, Sarah felt something unexpected. Instead of aggression or threat, she saw something that looked almost like loneliness. The moment stretched between them, woman and dog, each sizing up the other. Then Emma's toy, a bright red rubber ball, rolled out of the stroller and bounced across the sidewalk, coming to rest just a few feet from the German Shepherd. Sarah's heart pounded. This was the test, the moment that would reveal the dog's true nature. Would he ignore it, destroy it, or worse, would her daughter's movement toward the toy trigger some protective or predatory instinct? The German Shepherd looked at the ball, then at Emma, then back at the ball. Slowly he rose to his feet, and Sarah was struck by how imposing he looked when standing. Every instinct told her to grab Emma and run back to the house, but something made her wait, watching, as the dog approached the toy with careful, deliberate steps. What happened next would become the first chapter in a story that would transform not just Sarah's understanding of the abandoned animal, but the entire fabric of life on Maple Street. The German Shepherd picked up the ball gently in his mouth, carried it back toward the stroller, and dropped it at Sarah's feet before retreating to his previous position. His tail didn't wag, but his ears remained forward, attentive. Emma clapped her hands in delight, and for the first time since arriving on Maple Street, the dog's tail moved slightly, just the faintest hint of a wag. That evening, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the encounter with the German Shepherd. As she prepared dinner, while Emma played in her high chair, she found herself glancing repeatedly toward the front window. The dog had remained in the same general area throughout the day, moving only to find shade as the sun shifted across the sky. "You're quiet tonight," David observed, loosening his tie as he entered the kitchen. "Everything okay?" Sarah hesitated. How could she explain the strange connection she had felt with the abandoned animal? How could she describe the intelligence she had seen in those dark eyes, or the gentle way he had returned Emma's toy? "The dog is still out there," she said finally. "He's been there all day." David moved to the window and peered through the blinds. In the gathering dusk, he could make out the dog's silhouette beneath the oak tree, probably waiting for his owners to come back. They'll realize their mistake and return for him. But even as he said it, David felt a nagging doubt. There had been something deliberate about the way that car had sped away in the pre-dawn hours. He had been awakened by the sound of the engine and had glimpsed the vehicle through their bedroom window. It hadn't looked like someone who had accidentally lost their pet. "What if they don't come back?" Sarah asked quietly. Before David could answer, the phone rang. It was Janet Rodriguez, and her voice carried an edge of concern that immediately put Sarah on alert. "Sarah, I hope you don't mind me calling, but I wanted to warn you about something. Tom Bradley has been going around the neighborhood all afternoon, talking to people about that dog. He's convinced it's dangerous and is trying to organize some kind of action." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. "What kind of action?" "He wants to call animal control tomorrow morning. Says a dog that size with no identification is a liability for the whole street, especially with small children around." Through the kitchen window, Sarah could see lights coming on in houses along Maple Street. She imagined the conversations happening behind those illuminated windows, neighbors discussing the stranger in their midst, fear and speculation growing with each retelling. "Has the dog actually done anything threatening?" Sarah asked. "Not that I've seen," Janet replied. "My boys have been watching him from the window all day. They say he mostly just lies there. Miguel even threw a stick toward him this afternoon, and the dog just looked at it but didn't move to chase it or anything." After hanging up, Sarah felt a growing unease. She had lived in small communities before and knew how quickly suspicion could take root and spread. The German Shepherd hadn't asked to be abandoned on their street, but he was about to become the target of collective fear and misunderstanding. That night, as Sarah put Emma to bed, she found herself lingering by the nursery window. The streetlight cast a pale glow over the sidewalk, and she could see the dog's form curled beneath the oak tree. He looked smaller in the darkness, vulnerable rather than threatening. "What are you looking at, Mommy?" Emma babbled from her crib. Though at 10 months old, her words were still mostly incomprehensible sounds. "Just checking on our visitor, sweetheart," Sarah murmured, drawing the curtains closed. But sleep didn't come easily that night. Sarah found herself thinking about the stories her grandmother used to tell about guardian angels appearing in unexpected forms. The idea seemed foolish in the light of day, but in the quiet darkness, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this situation than anyone understood. The next morning brought the first real test of the neighborhood's resolve. Tom Bradley had indeed called animal control, and a white van with official markings pulled up to Maple Street just after 9 o'clock. Sarah watched from her living room as a uniformed officer stepped out, carrying a long pole with a loop at the end. Within minutes, several neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk, drawn by curiosity and concern. Mrs. Patterson had ventured out despite her arthritis, leaning heavily on her walker. Janet Rodriguez stood with her arms crossed, clearly conflicted about the situation. Even David had delayed leaving for work to see how events would unfold. The German shepherd, sensing the change in atmosphere, had risen to his feet and moved. Back against the fence line, his body language alert but not aggressive. The animal control officer, a middle-aged man named Bill Crawford, who had been doing this job for 15 years, approached slowly and methodically. "Anybody know where this dog came from?" Crawford called out to the assembled neighbors. "Dumped." "Here yesterday morning?" Tom Bradley answered immediately. "Been hanging around ever since. We're concerned about safety, especially with children in the neighborhood." Crawford nodded and continued his approach, speaking in low, soothing tones to the dog. "Easy, boy. Nobody's going to hurt you." But as he raised the catchpole, something unexpected happened. Emma's voice rang out from the Mitchells' front yard, where Sarah had brought her to get some morning air. The baby had spotted the dog and was pointing excitedly, babbling in her distinctive way. The German shepherd's ears perked up at the sound, and his attention shifted completely from the approaching officer to the small child. His tail, which had been tucked low, rose slightly, and he took a step forward, not toward Crawford, but toward the fence that separated him from Emma. "Careful," Tom Bradley warned loudly. "See how he's moving toward the baby? That's predatory behavior." But Sarah, watching from just a few feet away, saw something entirely different: the dog's body. Language wasn't aggressive or predatory. His ears were forward in a friendly position. His mouth was slightly open in what almost looked like a smile, and his entire posture suggested interest rather than threat. Emma, oblivious to the tension around her, continued her excited babbling, reaching her tiny hands toward the fence. The German shepherd moved closer, stopping just on the other side of the chain link, and sat down, bringing himself to a lower, less imposing height. Officer Crawford paused, studying the interaction. In his years of dealing with stray and abandoned animals, he had developed an instinct for reading animal behavior. What he was seeing didn't match the reports of a dangerous dog that needed immediate removal. "Has this animal shown any aggressive behavior toward anyone?" Crawford asked the gathered neighbors. "Well, no," Tom Bradley admitted reluctantly. "But that doesn't mean he won't. Dogs like this are unpredictable." "What do you mean, dogs like this?" Janet Rodriguez asked, her voice carrying a note of challenge. "German shepherds. Attack dogs. They're bred for protection and aggression. There's a reason someone dumped him instead of taking him to a shelter." Crawford approached the fence where the dog sat facing Emma. The animal acknowledged his presence with a glance, but didn't move away from his position near the baby. This behavior was telling. A truly dangerous or unsocialized dog would either flee or show defensive aggression when cornered. This dog was doing neither. "I'm going to need to take him in," Crawford announced, "but I have to say he doesn't seem aggressive, probably just scared and confused." As Crawford moved to secure the dog, Emma suddenly dropped her favorite stuffed bunny through the fence slats. The toy landed on the sidewalk, just inches from the German shepherd's front paws. What happened next silenced every conversation on Maple Street. The dog looked down at the bunny, then up at Emma, who had begun to cry at the loss of her cherished toy. Without hesitation, the German shepherd picked up the stuffed animal gently in his mouth, stood up, and carefully pushed it back through the fence slats toward the baby. Sarah bent down and retrieved the bunny, which was completely unharmed, bearing only the slightest dampness from the dog's mouth. She looked into the animal's eyes and saw something that made her heart race: intelligence, compassion, understanding. "Did everyone see that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Officer Crawford lowered his catchpole. In 15 years of animal control, he had rarely seen such clear evidence of gentle, protective behavior from a stray animal. "I'll still need to take him to the shelter," he said, but his tone had changed. Protocol requires it, but this is not a dangerous animal. As Crawford prepared to load the German Shepherd into his van, Sarah made a decision that surprised even herself. "Wait," she called out. "What if someone on the street was willing to take responsibility for him temporarily, just until we can find his original owners or a permanent home?" The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge. Tom Bradley shook his head vigorously. "Absolutely not. We don't know anything about this animal's history or training." But Mrs. Patterson, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during the proceedings, spoke up in her wavering but determined voice. "I saw what that dog just did. In 73 years, I've learned to trust my instincts about character, whether human or animal. That's not a vicious dog." The debate that followed would divide Maple Street into camps and set the stage for events that none of them could have anticipated. The impromptu neighborhood meeting that formed on Maple Street that morning would be remembered for years to come. What had started as a simple animal control call had evolved into something much more complex, a test of community values, fear versus compassion, and the power of first impressions. Officer Crawford found himself in the unusual position of mediating a dispute between neighbors rather than simply removing an animal. "Look," he said, addressing the growing crowd, "I've seen aggressive dogs and I've seen scared dogs. This one is scared but showing remarkable social awareness. However, if someone on this street wants to take temporary responsibility, they'll need to provide proof of vaccination, proper shelter, and agree to work toward finding a permanent solution." Sarah felt her heart racing. Was she really considering this? She had never owned a large dog, and with a baby in the house, was it wise to take such a risk? But every instinct told her that this animal posed no threat to Emma. In fact, she was beginning to suspect the opposite might be true. "I'll do it," she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. David, who had been listening quietly, turned to stare at his wife. "Sarah, we haven't discussed this." "I know it sounds crazy," she said, meeting his eyes, "but look at how he behaved with Emma. David, he returned her toy. He's been gentle and careful every single time she's been near the fence." Tom Bradley stepped forward, his face flushed with frustration. "This is insanity. You're all letting your emotions cloud your judgment. That dog could snap at any moment. What happens when your baby gets a little older and starts moving around? And more, what happens when she accidentally hurts him or startles him? What happens when someone breaks into our houses at night?" Mrs. Patterson countered, her voice stronger than anyone had heard it in months. "What happens when those teenagers who've been vandalizing mailboxes decide to target our properties? Maybe having a guardian around isn't such a bad thing." Janet Rodriguez nodded in agreement. "Mrs. Patterson has a point. Crime has been increasing in this area. Last month, the Hendersons 2 streets over had their garage broken into. So now, we're advocating for vigilante animals," Tom shot back. "This isn't the Wild West. We have police for protection." Officer Crawford cleared his throat. "Actually, Mr. Bradley, dogs can be excellent deterrents for property crime. And Mrs. Mitchell, if you're serious about this, I can give you the number for a local veterinarian who can do a full health and temperament evaluation. That might put everyone's minds at ease." As the debate continued, the German Shepherd remained in his position by the fence, seemingly aware that his fate was being decided, but showing no signs of agitation. Emma had fallen asleep in her stroller, her small hand still clutching the stuffed bunny that the dog had returned to her. Dr. Rebecca Hayes, the veterinarian Crawford recommended, arrived within 2 hours of Sarah's call. A woman in her 40s, with gentle hands and a calm demeanor, she had been working with animals for over 20 years and had seen every type of temperament imaginable. "I understand there's some concern about this fellow," she said, approaching the German Shepherd with confident but respectful body language. The examination that followed was thorough and revealing. Dr. Hayes checked the dog's teeth, looked into his ears, examined his coat and skin, and most importantly, observed his reactions to various stimuli. She dropped a metal tool to test his startle response, offered him treats to gauge his food aggression, and even brought out a small toy to see how he interacted with objects. "This is a well-socialized animal," she announced to the gathered neighbors. "He's approximately 4 years old, neutered, and shows signs of previous training. See how he automatically sits when I approach? That's learned behavior, not instinct. Someone invested time in teaching him manners." "But why would someone abandon a trained dog?" Sarah asked. Dr. Hayes's expression grew somber. "Happens more often than you'd think. Job loss, housing changes, family situations. People make heartbreaking decisions when they feel they have no choice. The good news is that his training makes him an ideal candidate for rehoming." She turned to address Tom Bradley directly. "Mr. Bradley, I understand your concerns, and they're not unreasonable. Large dogs can be intimidating, and any animal can be unpredictable under extreme stress. But this dog shows no signs of aggression, fear-biting, or territorial behavior. In fact, his calm demeanor in this stressful situation suggests excellent emotional stability." Dr. Hayes also examined the chain collar that still hung around the dog's neck. "This collar is concerning, though. It's too heavy for everyday wear and shows signs of prolonged use. This dog may have been kept chained for extended periods, which makes his social skills even more remarkable." As she prepared to remove the collar, something unexpected happened. Emma woke up from her nap and immediately looked around for the dog. When she spotted him near the fence, she began babbling excitedly and reaching toward him. The German Shepherd's response was immediate and telling. His ears perked up, his tail wagged slightly, and he moved closer to the fence, sitting down to bring himself to the baby's level. When Emma dropped her pacifier, the dog actually alerted Sarah by looking between the fallen object and the baby, as if trying to communicate the problem. "Extraordinary," Dr. Hayes murmured. "I've rarely seen such intuitive behavior with children. From any dog, let alone one that's been abandoned and is presumably stressed." David, who had been growing increasingly convinced by what he was witnessing, finally spoke up. "What would we need to do if we decided to keep him temporarily?" "First, vaccinations and a full health panel," Dr. Hayes replied. "Then I'd recommend a professional trainer evaluation to assess his command knowledge and establish any behavioral guidelines. And honestly, given his obvious attachment to your daughter, I'd suggest introducing them more formally in a controlled environment." That afternoon, with Tom Bradley watching disapprovingly from his lawn, Sarah and David set up a careful meeting between Emma and the German Shepherd in their backyard. Dr. Hayes supervised as they brought Emma close to the fence that separated their yard from the sidewalk where the dog waited. The interaction was magical in its simplicity. Emma, sitting in her mother's lap, reached through the fence slats to touch the dog's nose. He remained perfectly still, allowing the contact, his tail wagging gently. When Emma giggled, the dog's ears perked up, and when she clapped her hands, he play-bowed, lowering his front end while keeping his rear elevated in the universal canine gesture of friendliness. "I think he's already chosen his family," Dr. Hayes observed with a smile. But the decision wasn't without controversy. As word spread through the neighborhood that the Mitchells were considering keeping the dog, opinions became more polarized. Some neighbors, like Mrs. Patterson and Janet Rodriguez, supported the decision. Others, led by Tom Bradley, organized informal meetings to discuss their concerns. "It sets a dangerous precedent," Tom argued during one such gathering in the Hendersons' living room. "Today it's a German Shepherd. Tomorrow it could be a pit bull or a Rottweiler. Are we going to start accepting every animal that gets dumped in our neighborhood?" Karen Henderson, a mother of 3 who lived 2 houses down from the Mitchells, wasn't sure where she stood. "I have to admit, my kids are fascinated by the dog. They've been watching him from the window all week, and he just seems so calm." "That's exactly the problem," Tom replied. "Dogs can be unpredictable. They might seem calm one day and aggressive the next. With all the children on this street, is it worth the risk?" Meanwhile, at the Mitchell house, Sarah was having her own doubts. That evening, as she watched David build a temporary shelter in their backyard, she wondered if they were making a mistake. What if Tom was right? What if something went wrong? But then Emma crawled to the back door and pressed her face against the glass, looking out at the German Shepherd who had taken up residence in the shelter David had built. The dog was lying down, but his head was oriented toward the house, as if he was keeping watch. "Doggy," Emma said clearly, pointing toward the window. It was one of her first truly recognizable words, and she had chosen to use it for the abandoned animal who had somehow found his way into their lives. That night, as Sarah lay in bed listening to the sounds of the neighborhood settling into sleep, she heard something that made her sit up and listen more carefully. It was the sound of footsteps on the sidewalk, moving slowly and deliberately past their house. Then she heard a low, rumbling growl from the backyard, not threatening but clearly alerting. The footsteps paused, then moved away more quickly. Sarah smiled in the darkness, realizing that their new guardian was already earning his keep. 3 weeks had passed since the German Shepherd had officially become a temporary member of the Mitchell household, and the transformation was remarkable on multiple levels. The dog, whom Emma had begun calling Buddy in her babbling attempts at communication, had settled into a routine that seemed to revolve entirely around protecting and accompanying the little girl. Every morning, Buddy would position himself near the back door, waiting for Emma to appear for breakfast. When Sarah brought her outside to play, he would maintain a careful distance of about 10 feet, close enough to intervene if needed, but far enough away to avoid overwhelming the child. His presence had become such a natural part of their daily rhythm that Sarah found it hard to remember what life had been like without him. The professional trainer that Dr. Hayes had recommended, a woman named Lisa Chen, who specialized in family dogs, had confirmed what everyone was beginning to suspect. Buddy was exceptionally well trained and had an unusual aptitude for child protection. During their evaluation sessions, Lisa had discovered that Buddy knew dozens of commands and showed remarkable impulse control. "This dog has received professional training," Lisa explained to Sarah and David during one of their sessions. "Not just basic obedience, but specialized work. See how he automatically checks with you before approaching Emma? That's learned behavior that takes months to instill." "What kind of training?" David asked, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "Could be anything from service dog preparation to security work. The good news is that whatever his background, he's been trained to be gentle with children and responsive to family dynamics." The neighborhood reaction to Buddy's presence remained mixed. Mrs. Patterson had become one of his strongest advocates, often sitting on her front porch in the evenings just to watch him playing gently with Emma in the backyard. Janet, Rodriguez's twin boys, had been permitted to interact with Buddy under supervision, and their delight in having a real, live German Shepherd in the neighborhood had convinced their mother that Tom Bradley's fears were largely unfounded. However, Tom himself remained unconvinced and had begun documenting what he considered evidence of Buddy's potential danger. He kept a notebook of observations, the times Buddy barked at strangers walking by, the occasions when he positioned himself between Emma and unfamiliar visitors, the way he tracked movement along the street with alert intensity. "That dog is always watching," Tom complained to anyone who would listen. "It's not natural behavior for a family pet. He's been trained for protection work, and that makes him unpredictable." The first real test of the neighborhood's trust in Buddy came on a sunny Thursday afternoon when Sarah decided to take Emma to the small playground at the end of Maple Street. It was the first time she had ventured beyond their yard with both Emma and Buddy, and she wasn't sure how either of them would react to the change in environment. Buddy walked beside the stroller with perfect heel discipline, his attention constantly scanning their surroundings, but never straying far from Emma. When they reached the playground, several other mothers were there with their children, and Sarah braced herself for potentially uncomfortable conversations. "Oh my goodness, is that the dog everyone's been talking about?" asked Jennifer Walsh, whose 3-year-old daughter Lily was climbing on the jungle gym. "He's beautiful." Sarah felt relief wash over her. "This is Buddy. We're still getting to know each other, but he's been wonderful with Emma." As if summoned by his name, Buddy moved closer to the stroller and sat down, his position clearly indicating that he was on duty. Emma babbled happily and reached toward him, and he allowed her to touch his ear before gently moving his head away. "Can I pet him?" Lily asked, approaching with the fearless curiosity of a preschooler. Sarah hesitated. They had practiced this scenario at home, but this was the first real-world test. "Very gently," she said, guiding Lily's small hand toward Buddy's head. "He's very nice, but we always ask permission first." Buddy accepted the child's attention with patience, his tail wagging slowly. When Lily lost interest and ran back to the playground equipment, he resumed his watchful position beside Emma's stroller. "He's like a professional babysitter," Jennifer observed with admiration. "I wish my dog had half that focus." But the peaceful afternoon took an unexpected turn when a group of teenagers on bicycles rode through the playground area, their loud music and reckless riding creating chaos among the younger children. One of the bikes veered close to Emma's stroller, and the rider shouted something inappropriate as he passed. Buddy's reaction was immediate and measured. He stood up, placed himself directly between the stroller and the teenagers, and issued a single deep bark that carried both warning and authority. The teenager on the bike actually stopped and looked back, clearly startled by the size and presence of the German Shepherd. "Sorry," the kid called out, though whether he was apologizing to Sarah or to Buddy wasn't clear. The entire incident lasted less than 30 seconds, but it left Sarah with a profound realization about what Buddy brought to their family. He wasn't just a pet or even a guard dog. He was a protector with the intelligence to assess situations and respond appropriately. That evening, as Sarah recounted the playground incident to David, they both recognized that they had reached a turning point. Buddy wasn't a temporary arrangement anymore. He was becoming an integral part of their family structure. "I think we need to make this official," David said, watching through the window as Buddy lay in the backyard, positioned where he could see both the street and the back door. "He belongs here." But making the arrangement permanent would require navigating some challenges they hadn't anticipated. Tom Bradley had been lobbying other neighbors to petition the Homeowners Association about pets, claiming that allowing large dogs in the neighborhood would affect property values. Additionally, they still had no legal claim to Buddy, and Sarah worried constantly that his original owners might return to reclaim him. Dr. Hayes helped them address the legal concerns by putting them in touch with local animal welfare organizations that specialized in abandoned pet cases. After following proper protocols for advertising Buddy's presence and waiting the required time period, they would be able to formally adopt him if no one came forward. The fact that he was wearing that heavy chain collar suggests he may have been abandoned deliberately, Dr. Hayes explained. Unfortunately, it happens when People can't care for an animal anymore, but are too ashamed or overwhelmed to surrender him properly. The process of potentially adopting Buddy also forced Sarah and David to confront some deeper questions about their family's future. Emma was clearly thriving with Buddy's constant presence. She'd become more confident in her movements, more vocal in her communications, and seemed to sleep more peacefully, knowing her four-legged guardian was nearby. "Look at her," Sarah said one evening, as they watched Emma crawling around the living room while Buddy maintained his patient supervision. "She's fearless because she knows he's watching out for her." David nodded, but he also recognized the responsibility they were taking on. A dog like Buddy could live another 10 years easily. That's Emma's entire childhood and into her teens. Are we prepared for that kind of commitment? The question hung between them, loaded with implications about everything from family finances to future housing decisions. But as they watched Emma pull herself up to standing position using Buddy's fur for support and saw how carefully he remained still to accommodate her unsteady movements, both parents felt the same certainty settling in their hearts. 3 days later, their resolve was tested in a way none of them could have predicted. Sarah was in the kitchen preparing lunch when she heard Emma's delighted laughter from the living room, followed immediately by Buddy's urgent barking. The tone was different from his usual alert barks, carrying a note of distress that sent Sarah running. She found Emma standing at the open front door, having somehow managed to unlatch and push it open, while Sarah's attention was elsewhere. The toddler was taking unsteady steps toward the sidewalk, drawn by the sight of a delivery truck parked across the street. Buddy was positioned between Emma and the street, his body blocking her path while he barked insistently toward the house, clearly trying to alert Sarah to the emergency. When Emma tried to step around him, he gently but firmly nudged her back with his shoulder, never using his teeth or showing any aggression, but making it impossible for her to continue toward the potentially dangerous street. Sarah scooped up Emma just as the delivery truck's engine started, and the sound that would have drawn a curious toddler directly into traffic. "Oh my God," she whispered, holding Emma tight and looking down at Buddy, who had stopped barking the moment the child was safe in her mother's arms. That night, after double-checking all the door latches and discussing child-proofing improvements with David, Sarah realized that Buddy had probably saved Emma's life. The thought was both terrifying and deeply humbling. "He didn't just stop her," she told David as they stood in Emma's darkened nursery, watching their daughter sleep peacefully. "He called for help. He knew exactly what to do." David put his arm around his wife's shoulders, both of them processing the magnitude of what had almost happened and what had prevented it. "I guess the question isn't whether we're ready to commit to Buddy," he said quietly. "The question is whether we can afford not to." The community meeting that Tom Bradley organized for the following Saturday evening was intended to be the final word on the German Shepherd situation, as he had taken to calling it in his increasingly frequent conversations with neighbors. He had spent the week gathering what he considered evidence of the dog's unsuitability for family life, and he was confident that rational discussion would convince the Mitchells to reconsider their decision. The meeting was held in the community center at the end of Maple Street, a small building that served as the neighborhood's gathering place for everything from book clubs to emergency planning sessions. By 7 o'clock, nearly 30 residents had assembled, representing almost every household on the street and several from adjacent blocks who had heard about the controversy. Sarah and David arrived with carefully prepared notes and character references for Buddy, including statements from Dr. Hayes, trainer Lisa Chen, and even Officer Crawford from Animal Control. They had debated whether to bring Emma, but decided that her bedtime routine was more important than making a point about Buddy's gentleness with children. Tom Bradley had prepared extensively for this moment. He stood at the front of the room, with a poster board covered in photographs and notes, looking every inch the retired police officer, presenting evidence to a jury. "I want to be clear from the start," Tom began, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being taken seriously. "This isn't about the Mitchell family personally. They're good people who have made an understandable but misguided decision. This is about community safety and the precedent we're setting for future situations." He pointed to his display board, which featured several photographs of Buddy taken from various angles around the neighborhood. "This animal weighs approximately 85 pounds and has been trained for protection work. In the past month, I have documented 17 instances of aggressive posturing, including direct challenges to residents walking past the Mitchell property." Sarah felt her stomach clench. The photographs made Buddy look imposing and serious, capturing moments when he was alert and watchful, but removing all context that would show his gentle interactions with Emma and other children. "Furthermore," Tom continued, "large dogs like this are statistically more likely to cause serious injury if they do attack. We have elderly residents on this street, small children, and people with mobility issues who could be seriously hurt if this animal decides to act on his protective instincts." Mrs. Patterson, despite her arthritis and the difficulty of getting to the meeting, had insisted on attending. She raised her hand from her seat in the front row. "Tom, I appreciate your concerns, but I think you're painting an incomplete picture. That dog has been nothing but gentle with every person he's encountered." "With respect, Eleanor, you're looking at this emotionally rather than logically," Tom replied. "The fact that he hasn't attacked anyone yet doesn't mean he won't. These dogs are bred for protection and aggression. It's in their nature." Janet Rodriguez stood up from her seat near the back. "Actually, Tom, I've done some research on German Shepherds since this whole situation started. They're actually known for being excellent family dogs when properly trained. And from what I've seen, Buddy is extremely well trained." "That's exactly my point," Tom said, his voice rising slightly. "He's been trained for protection work. That kind of training can include attack commands, intimidation techniques, and defensive aggression. Do we really want that in a residential neighborhood?" David decided it was time to present their side of the story. He stood up, holding the folder of references they had prepared. "Tom, I understand your concerns, but I think we need to look at facts rather than speculation. We have professional evaluations from a veterinarian, an animal behaviorist, and a certified trainer, all stating that Buddy shows no signs of aggression or unpredictability." "Papers can say anything," Tom shot back. "I'm talking about real-world observation. That dog is constantly scanning the street, tracking movement, positioning himself strategically. That's not family pet behavior. That's security dog behavior." Karen Henderson, who had been quiet during most of the debate, raised her hand. "Can I ask a question? Has anyone here actually seen Buddy do anything threatening? I mean, actually seen him growl at someone or lunge or show his teeth?" The room fell silent as neighbors looked around at each other. After a long moment, Tom answered reluctantly, "Not exactly threatening, no, but the potential is there." "So we're talking about removing a dog based on potential rather than actual behavior?" asked Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who had become friendly with Sarah after their meeting at the playground. "That seems like a dangerous precedent too." The debate continued for another hour, with neighbors sharing their observations and concerns. Some supported Tom's position, worried about liability and the precedent of accepting abandoned animals. Others defended the Mitchell family's right to keep Buddy, especially given his demonstrated gentleness with children and his potential value as a neighborhood deterrent to petty crime. Mrs. Patterson struggled to her feet, and the room quieted. Respectfully, "I've lived on this street for 43 years, she said, her voice wavering but determined. I've seen a lot of changes, some good and some bad. Crime has been increasing in this area. Break-ins, vandalism, teenagers causing trouble. Since that dog arrived, I sleep better at night, knowing there's a guardian watching over our street. A guardian? Tom challenged. Eleanor, that's exactly the kind of thinking that leads to problems. We're not living in the frontier days. We have police and security systems. Police who come after something bad has already happened, Mrs. Patterson replied. That dog prevented my house from being broken into last week. This was news to everyone in the room. Sarah turned to stare at the elderly woman. What happened, Mrs. Patterson? Tuesday night, around 2 in the morning, I heard someone trying to open my back gate. I was too scared to get up and look, but I heard that dogs start barking from your backyard. Whoever it was ran off immediately. In the morning, I found footprints in my garden and scratches on my gate latch. The revelation shifted the energy in the room. Several neighbors began murmuring among themselves, and Tom's confident demeanor faltered slightly. That's just speculation, he said, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. You don't know that the dog's barking scared anyone off. I know what I heard, Mrs. Patterson replied firmly, and I know I feel safer with that animal watching over our neighborhood. But Tom wasn't ready to concede defeat. Even if that's true, it proves my point about his training. Guard dogs are trained to be territorial and protective. What happens when that territoriality extends to normal neighborhood activities? What happens when a child from another street rides their bike past his territory? As if summoned by the escalating tension in the room, the sound of police sirens suddenly filled the air outside. The meeting paused as everyone turned toward the windows, where flashing lights could be seen reflecting off the community center walls. Officer Martinez, a young policeman who patrolled the neighborhood regularly, appeared in the doorway of the community center. Sorry to interrupt, he said, scanning the crowd. We're responding to a break-in attempt 2 blocks over on Oak Street. The perpetrator fled when a dog started barking. We're canvassing the area to see if anyone saw or heard anything suspicious. The irony of the timing wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Tom Bradley's face reddened as neighbors turned to look at him, and Sarah felt a mix of vindication and concern. Officer Martinez, Mrs. Patterson called out. That might have been our neighborhood dog. He's been alerting us to suspicious activity lately. Officer Martinez nodded. That's actually helpful information. Dogs can be excellent early warning systems for property crime. Is this the German Shepherd I've seen on Maple Street? Yes, Sarah answered. His name is Buddy. Well-behaved animal from what I've observed, Officer Martinez said. Professional bearing, good alertness without aggression. Those are valuable qualities in a neighborhood watchdog. After the officer left to continue his investigation, the community meeting resumed, but the dynamic had fundamentally changed. Tom's arguments about Buddy being a potential danger seemed less convincing in light of the real crime, happening just blocks away. Crime that Buddy had potentially helped prevent. However, Tom wasn't ready to surrender his position entirely. This just reinforces what I've been saying, he argued, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. That dog is operating as a guard animal, not a family pet. That comes with risks and responsibilities that I don't think this neighborhood is prepared for. The meeting eventually concluded without a formal resolution, but the battle lines had been drawn more clearly than ever. About half the neighbors supported the Mitchell family's right to keep Buddy, while the other half remained concerned about the precedent and potential risks. As people filed out of the community center, Sarah felt emotionally drained. The support from neighbors like Mrs. Patterson and Janet Rodriguez was encouraging, but Tom's persistent opposition and the valid concerns raised by other neighbors weighed heavily on her mind. Do you think we're doing the right thing? She asked David as they walked home under the streetlights of Maple Street. David was quiet for a moment, considering the question that had become increasingly complex over the past month. "I think we're doing what feels right for our family," he said finally, "but I also think we need to be prepared for the possibility that this isn't over." They were both right. As they approached their house, they could see Buddy's silhouette in the backyard, alert and watchful even at this late hour. He had become so much more than just a pet. He was a symbol of different philosophies about community, safety, and the bonds between humans and animals. What none of them realized was that the events of the following week would test all of their convictions in ways they couldn't have imagined, and that the true test of Buddy's character was still to come. The storm that hit Millbrook the following Wednesday was the kind of weather event that local meteorologists would reference for years to come. It arrived without the usual warning signs, transforming an ordinary spring evening into a chaotic test of the community's preparedness and character. Sarah had been giving Emma a bath when the first thunder rolled across the sky, but the weather forecast had called for only light rain, so she wasn't particularly concerned. By the time she had finished the bedtime routine and settled Emma in her crib, however, the wind had picked up significantly, and rain was beginning to pelt the windows with increasing intensity. Buddy, who normally spent his evenings in the backyard before coming inside for the night, had been restless all day. Sarah had noticed him pacing the fence line, sniffing the air repeatedly, and positioning himself closer to the house than usual. Now, as the storm intensified, he was standing at the back door, whining softly and pawing at the glass. "David, I think we should bring Buddy inside," Sarah called to her husband, who was in the living room monitoring weather updates on his phone. "Good idea," David replied, getting up to open the door. "This is supposed to get worse before it gets better." As soon as Buddy entered the house, his behavior became even more agitated. Instead of settling into his usual spot near Emma's room, he moved from window to window, his ears constantly rotating, to track sounds that Sarah and David couldn't hear over the increasing wind. "What's wrong with him?" Sarah asked, watching Buddy pace with obvious anxiety. "Dogs can sense barometric pressure changes," David replied, though he was also concerned by the animal's unusual behavior. "He probably knows this storm is going to be worse than we think." David's assessment proved prophetic. Within an hour, the National Weather Service had issued a severe thunderstorm warning for their area, with alerts about possible tornadoes and dangerous straight-line winds. The power flickered several times before finally going out completely, plunging Maple Street into darkness, except for the occasional lightning flash. Sarah and David lit candles and battery-powered lanterns, creating a cozy atmosphere that did little to calm Buddy's increasing agitation. He had positioned himself near the front door and was issuing low, rumbling sounds that weren't quite growls, but clearly indicated high alert status. "Maybe I should check on Mrs. Patterson," Sarah suggested, peering through the front window toward the elderly woman's house. "She lives alone, and with her mobility issues, she might need help if something happens." Before David could respond, a tremendous crash echoed through the neighborhood, followed by the sound of splintering wood and metal. Through the rain-streaked windows, they could see that the large oak tree in the Hendersons' front yard had been uprooted by the wind and had fallen across the street, blocking the roadway and bringing down power lines. "Nobody's getting in or out of this neighborhood tonight," David observed grimly. "We're on our own until morning." That's when they heard the shouting. It was muffled by the storm, but unmistakably human voices calling for help. Sarah and David looked at each other in alarm, trying to determine where the sounds were coming from. Buddy, however, had no such uncertainty. He was at the front door, scratching insistently and barking with increasing urgency. Someone's in trouble, Sarah said, grabbing a flashlight. We have to help. David was already putting on his rain jacket. You stay here with Emma. I'll go see what's happening. But Buddy had other ideas. The moment David opened the front door, the German Shepherd bolted into the storm, his powerful form disappearing almost immediately into the rain and darkness. David followed, calling Buddy's name, but the dog was already far ahead, moving with purpose through the chaos of the storm. Sarah watched from the doorway, torn between wanting to help and needing to stay with Emma, who had begun crying in her crib upstairs, disturbed by the thunder and the unusual activity in the house. David found Buddy 3 houses down, standing in the Hendersons' front yard and barking insistently at the fallen oak tree. As David approached with his flashlight, he realized with horror that the tree hadn't just blocked the street. It had partially collapsed onto the Henderson house, and there were voices coming from underneath the debris. "Karen! Kids!" David shouted, trying to make himself heard over the storm. "Are you hurt?" "We're trapped in the basement," came Karen Henderson's voice, muffled but audible. "The tree came through the kitchen ceiling, and we can't get to the stairs." David quickly assessed the situation. The massive oak had punched through the roof and upper floor of the Henderson house, blocking the basement stairs with debris and creating a dangerous maze of broken beams and twisted metal. Getting the family out would require careful navigation and probably tools that weren't immediately available. But Buddy was already moving. The dog had found a gap in the debris near what used to be the kitchen window and was working his way through the wreckage with remarkable agility. David could hear him barking from inside the house, and then Karen Henderson's voice again, this time with relief and amazement. "There's a dog down here. It's the German Shepherd from the Mitchell house." David worked his way closer to the debris, following the path Buddy had taken. Through a gap in the fallen beams, he could see into the basement where the Henderson family, Karen, her husband Mike, and their 3 children, were huddled together, uninjured, but clearly shaken. Buddy was with them, allowing the children to pet him while maintaining his alert posture. "Is everyone okay?" David called down. "We're not hurt," Mike Henderson replied, "but we can't get out. The stairs are completely blocked, and water's starting to come in through the window wells." David realized that the basement was beginning to flood as storm drains in the area became overwhelmed. The Henderson family needed to get out quickly, but the conventional exit routes were impossible. However, Buddy seemed to have found something. The dog was moving toward the back corner of the basement, sniffing intently at what appeared to be an old coal chute that connected to the backyard. "Follow the dog," David called down. "I think he's found another way out." What followed was a rescue operation that would have seemed impossible under normal circumstances. Buddy led the Henderson family through the basement to the old coal chute, where Mike was able to break through the rusted metal door that led to the backyard. One by one, the family members climbed through the narrow opening, with Buddy remaining in the basement until everyone else was safe. When the youngest Henderson child, 6-year-old Emma, coincidentally sharing a name with the Mitchell baby, became too frightened to go through the dark chute, Buddy positioned himself next to her and allowed her to hold onto his collar as she made her way through the opening. By the time everyone was safely in the backyard, neighbors from up and down Maple Street had emerged from their houses with flashlights and rain gear, drawn by the commotion. Despite the ongoing storm, word of the rescue spread quickly, and soon there was an impromptu gathering of residents helping the Henderson family and assessing the damage. Tom Bradley arrived on the scene carrying a large flashlight and wearing full rain gear. When he saw the Henderson family safe in their backyard, with Buddy sitting calmly among the children who were petting him despite their recent trauma, his expression underwent a visible change. How did they get out? Tom asked David, surveying the wreckage of the house. "The dog found an escape route," David replied simply. "Led them through the basement to an old coal chute." Tom looked down at Buddy, who was allowing little Emma Henderson to hug his neck, while her parents talked to other neighbors about temporary housing arrangements. The sight of the large German Shepherd being gentle with a frightened child in the aftermath of a rescue that might have saved the family's lives clearly affected the retired police officer. Mrs. Patterson, despite the storm and her mobility issues, had managed to make her way to the Henderson property with the help of Janet Rodriguez. When she saw Buddy surrounded by the Henderson children, all of them safe because of his actions, tears began streaming down her weathered cheeks. "I knew," she said to anyone within hearing distance. "I knew that dog was special from the moment I saw him." The storm continued for several more hours, but the mood on Maple Street had fundamentally shifted. Neighbors who had been skeptical of Buddy's presence were now seeing him in an entirely different light. Karen Henderson, in particular, was vocal about her gratitude. "He didn't hesitate," she told everyone who would listen. "The moment he found us in that basement, you could see him thinking, figuring out how to help. It was like having a four-legged emergency responder." Even more significantly, Tom Bradley approached David as the immediate crisis was winding down. The former police officer looked tired and thoughtful, and when he spoke, his voice carried none of its usual challenging tone. "I owe you and your family an apology," Tom said, watching Buddy, who was now lying down in the Hendersons' backyard, but maintaining his alert posture. "I've been focused on what could go wrong instead of recognizing what was going right." David was surprised by the admission, but gracious in his response. "You were looking out for the neighborhood, Tom. That's not something to apologize for." "Maybe not, but I was wrong about that dog," Tom continued. "What he did tonight, that wasn't just training or instinct. That was intelligence and compassion working together. I've seen a lot of emergency responders in my career, and that dog performed better than some humans I've worked with." As dawn broke over Maple Street, revealing the full extent of the storm damage, it also illuminated something else, a community that had been fundamentally changed by the events of one dramatic night. The fallen oak tree would be cleared, the Henderson house would be rebuilt, and life would eventually return to normal. But the relationship between the neighbors and the German Shepherd, who had appeared so mysteriously in their midst, would never be the same. Buddy had passed the ultimate test, proving beyond any doubt that he belonged not just with the Mitchell family, but as a guardian and protector of the entire street. The abandoned dog, who had once been viewed with suspicion and fear, had become a hero, and in doing so, had taught everyone on Maple Street something valuable about the importance of giving second chances and looking beyond first impressions. 6 months had passed since the storm that changed everything on Maple Street, and the transformation of the neighborhood extended far beyond the physical repairs that had restored the Henderson house and removed the fallen oak tree. The community itself had been rebuilt on a foundation of shared experience and mutual understanding that nobody could have anticipated. Buddy's formal adoption had been completed 3 months earlier, with every neighbor on the street signing a petition of support that Dr. Hayes had never seen equaled in her 20 years of veterinary practice. The legal process, which Sarah and David had once worried might be contentious, had become a celebration of community consensus. The German Shepherd, who had once been nameless and unwanted, now wore a collar with an engraved tag that read, "Buddy Mitchell, Guardian of Maple Street," a gift from Mrs. Patterson that had been presented at a neighborhood barbecue in his honor. Emma, now walking confidently and chattering in the rapid, incomprehensible way of toddlers, had developed an even stronger bond with Buddy. Every morning she would toddle to the back door and call for her Buddy dog, and he would appear immediately, ready for whatever adventure the day might bring. Their relationship had become the subject of countless photographs and videos that Sarah shared with family members who marveled at the gentle giant who served as Emma's constant protector and playmate. The most remarkable change, however, had been in Tom Bradley. The former police officer had become one of Buddy's most vocal advocates, often citing the dog's rescue of the Henderson family as an example of how quick judgments could blind people to important truths. Tom had even volunteered to help with Buddy's ongoing training sessions with Lisa Chen, adding his knowledge of security and emergency response to the dog's already impressive skill set. "I spent 30 years in law enforcement," Tom explained to anyone who would listen, "and I learned that the best partners are the ones who can think independently and act decisively when it matters most. That dog has both qualities in abundance." The Henderson family had become particularly close to the Mitchells in the aftermath of their rescue. Karen Henderson had insisted on contributing to Buddy's veterinary expenses, and her children had become regular visitors to the Mitchell backyard, where they would play games that always included Buddy as both participant and referee. "He saved our lives," Mike Henderson would say simply, whenever anyone questioned the expense or commitment involved in caring for a large dog. "Everything else is just details." Mrs. Patterson, whose health had actually improved since she began taking daily walks around the neighborhood with the confidence that Buddy was watching over the area, had become the unofficial historian of the dog's integration into Maple street life. She kept a scrapbook filled with photographs, newspaper clippings, and handwritten accounts of Buddy's various acts of service to the community. The local newspaper had featured Buddy's story in a series of articles about community, resilience, and the bonds between humans and animals. The coverage had attracted attention from animal welfare organizations and training facilities, several of which had offered to sponsor Buddy's ongoing education as a therapy and service animal. But perhaps the most significant recognition had come from an unexpected source. Officer Martinez, the young policeman who had been patrolling the neighborhood during the community meeting months earlier, had recommended Buddy for inclusion in an informal network of civilian dogs that assisted with community policing efforts. "Dogs, like Buddy, serve as early warning systems and deterrents," Officer Martinez explained to Sarah and David during one of his visits. "They're not replacing professional security, but they're adding a layer of protection that benefits everyone in the area." The impact of Buddy's presence on neighborhood crime had been measurable and significant. Break-ins and vandalism, which had been increasing problems before his arrival, had virtually disappeared from Maple Street and the surrounding blocks. Word had spread through less desirable elements of the community that the German Shepherd on Maple Street was both highly trained and extremely protective of his territory. On this particular Saturday morning, Sarah stood at her kitchen window watching Emma and Buddy play their favorite game in the backyard. Emma would hide behind the swing set, and Buddy would pretend not to know where she was, allowing her to surprise him with delighted squeals and giggles. It was a routine that never got old for either of them, and watching it filled Sarah with a contentment she hadn't known was possible. David emerged from the garage, where he had been working on building a more permanent shelter for Buddy, though the dog now spent most of his time inside the house. "The new doghouse is almost finished," he announced, brushing sawdust off his shirt. "Though I'm not sure he'll ever use it. It's the thought that counts," Sarah replied, smiling. "Besides, Emma likes having a project to help with." As if summoned by the mention of her name, Emma came running from the backyard with Buddy trotting beside her in his usual protective formation. The toddler's vocabulary had expanded significantly in recent months, and she had become quite articulate about her relationship with her four-legged companion. "Buddy, watch me," Emma announced proudly, a phrase that had become her way of explaining why she felt safe exploring the world around her. "Yes, sweetheart," Sarah agreed, kneeling down to hug her daughter. "Buddy always watches over you." That afternoon brought an unexpected visitor that would provide the final chapter in Buddy's origin story. A middle-aged man knocked on the Mitchells' front door, introducing himself as Robert Chen, Lisa's older brother, and a former military working dog trainer who had recently returned from overseas deployment. "My sister told me about your dog," Robert explained when Sarah and David invited him in. "From her description of his training and behavior, I think I might know where he came from." The story Robert told filled in the missing pieces of Buddy's past in a way that was both heartbreaking and redemptive. Buddy had indeed been professionally trained, but not for security or protection work as Tom Bradley had initially suspected. He had been trained as a therapy and assistance dog for a veteran with PTSD who had struggled to readjust to civilian life. The veteran's name was Marcus Thompson, Robert explained. He was a good man who had served multiple deployments, but he couldn't get the help he needed when he came home. His family tried to support him, but the situation became impossible when he had to move in with elderly parents who couldn't handle a large dog. The decision to abandon Buddy had been made in desperation and shame, Robert explained. Marcus had driven around for hours before finally stopping on Maple Street, hoping that the well-maintained neighborhood would provide his beloved companion with a chance for a better life. "Marcus passed away 2 months ago," Robert said quietly. "But before he did, he asked me to try to find out what happened to Buddy. He never stopped regretting that decision, but he never stopped hoping that his dog had found a good home." The revelation provided closure for Sarah and David, who had always wondered about the circumstances that had brought Buddy into their lives. It also explained the dog's exceptional training and his particular sensitivity to stress and emotional needs. Marcus would be so happy to know that Buddy found a family and became a community guardian, Robert continued. It's exactly what he would have wanted for him. As Robert prepared to leave, he had one final surprise. From his car, he retrieved a small wooden box that contained Buddy's original training records, photographs from his puppyhood, and a letter that Marcus had written but never sent. The letter, addressed simply to "Whoever finds my dog," was a heartfelt explanation of Buddy's background and a plea for understanding and care. It ended with words that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. "This dog has more love and loyalty in his heart than most humans I've known. He deserves a family who will appreciate what he has to offer. Please be kind to him. He's been through enough." That evening, as the Mitchell family gathered in their living room for their usual end-of-day routine, Buddy lay stretched across the floor in a position where he could monitor both the front door and the stairs leading to Emma's room. It was the same protective posture he had assumed every night since joining their family, but now they understood it in a completely different context. "He was trained to be a guardian," Sarah said softly, stroking Buddy's ears as Emma curled up against his side with a picture book. "He's just been waiting for the right family to protect." David nodded, watching his daughter read to the patient dog, who listened to her babbling as if it was the most important story he had ever heard. "I think he found what he was looking for." As the months turned into years, Buddy's legend on Maple Street continued to grow. Children who had grown up with him in the neighborhood would carry stories of their gentle giant protector into adulthood. Parents would use his example to teach lessons about looking beyond appearances and giving second chances to those who needed them most. Mrs. Patterson, who lived to be 91, would often say that watching Buddy's transformation from abandoned stranger too, beloved community guardian had been one of the most beautiful things she had witnessed in her long life. Her scrapbook became a neighborhood treasure, passed down through families as a reminder of what was possible when people chose trust over fear. Emma, who grew up with Buddy as her constant companion, developed a love for animals and a confidence in the world that her parents attributed directly to her early bond with the German Shepherd, who had appeared so mysteriously in their lives. She would often tell friends that she had learned everything important about loyalty, protection, and unconditional love from her first and best friend, Buddy. Tom Bradley, whose change of heart about Buddy had been so complete and public, became an advocate for animal welfare and community policing partnerships. He often spoke at civic events about the importance of looking beyond first impressions and the value of having guardians who served without expectation of reward. And Buddy himself continued to embody the qualities that had made him such an unexpected blessing to Maple Street: intelligence, loyalty, gentleness with those who needed protection, and an unwavering commitment to the family and community that had given him a second chance at belonging. The abandoned dog, who had once represented fear and uncertainty, had become a symbol of hope, redemption, and the transformative power of love. His story served as a reminder that sometimes the best gifts come in unexpected packages, and that the courage to trust can lead to relationships that change not just individual lives, but entire communities. In the end, Buddy had found exactly what he had been searching for since that dark morning when he was left alone on an unfamiliar street. A place where he belonged, a purpose that matched his training and his heart, and a family that understood that true guardianship is always based in love. Dear viewers and listeners, we hope Buddy's incredible journey from abandoned stranger to beloved community guardian has touched your hearts as much as it has ours. This remarkable story of trust, transformation, and the unbreakable bonds between humans and animals reminds us that sometimes the greatest blessings come from the most unexpected places. If Buddy's tale of courage and unconditional love resonated with you, we invite you to join our growing community by subscribing to our channel and giving this story a thumbs up. Share your own experiences with rescue animals or unexpected friendships. In the comments below, we love hearing how these stories connect with your own lives. Don't miss our upcoming tales of hope, resilience, and the extraordinary relationships that make life meaningful. New stories of heart and humanity await you every week, each one carefully crafted to remind you of the beautiful connections that surround us all. Thank you for allowing us to share Buddy's story with you. And remember, sometimes the best guardians come on four paws and with hearts full of unconditional love.